Today's video is sponsored by BoardVPN. Stay tuned until the end of the video for a special. Hello everyone, my name is Raymond, and I am the creator of the Street King and a game developer. Welcome to my 5th devlog for Left Turn Legend, the craziest oval circuit racing game you've ever seen, now with 100% more of America's favorite pastime. No, not baseball. What I'm referring to, of course, is getting bombarded with advertisements for things you don't care about. And what better way is there to advertise your corporation than slapping your logo onto a stock car that ain't even stock? To put the sponsors on the cars, I had to create a livery editor of some sort. While there's already a decal system in the Street King, I decided to build up a new system from scratch for Left Turn Legend that would take advantage of the low poly models and support up to 50 decals. To start, I took all of my car models and made UV maps for them in Blender. When you want to add detail to a 3D model, one way of doing that is a texture, which is basically a 2D image that we put onto the 3D surface. The decals are eventually going to all be packed into a 1024 by 1024 pixel image, so I had to cleverly make the UV map so that the maximum amount of the texture is used. Here's an example of a bad UV map and a more efficient one. Once this was done, it was time to write code for handling the decals. The first step is to project the decal onto the car. This is pretty similar to how a projector would work in real life. When you move the projector around, the image gets distorted on the surface depending on the angle. To replicate this in code though, it's a bit more complicated. Since 3D models are all made of triangles, our projected decal is basically taking these triangles and chopping them so that we only include a rectangular area. To create this rectangular cut, I use 4 separate planar cuts at the same time. Now that we have our projected model, we need to make this usable in our texture. To do this, I had to convert the coordinates of my model from real-world coordinates to UV coordinates. With the data from the original car model, I'm able to grab the UV coordinates of each point in the projected model and transform it. This gives a decal model that matches the car, but in UV space instead. With the decal converted into texture coordinates, it's finally ready for rendering. A specialized camera renders up to 50 layers of decals into a single texture, and the output is the paint job. However, this is game dev. Things never go right on the first try, and I ran into a really annoying problem. On the UV seams, which are points where the UV coordinates aren't continuous even though the model is, I'll get these rendering artifacts that weren't covered by the decals. These artifacts happen because the texture resolution is limited, so at the edges of the decals, the texture would render with jagged pixel edges. This effect was very noticeable with certain designs, so I had to come up with a way to fix it. After a lot of thinking, experimenting, dead Stack Overflow links, and researching, I came up with a solution. Like a lot of other programming problems, the solution to this was kind of hacky, but if it works, I'm not gonna complain. First, I would transform the entire car's 3D model into texture space and use this as the base layer. Then, I would render the rest of the decals as normal. This time, however, I would keep track of all areas of the image that weren't covered by the car's model. This information went into the texture's alpha channel, which is usually used for transparency, but was currently unused in my textures. Since all of the uncovered areas were marked in the alpha channel, I now know which parts of the texture are going to be along UV seams. Using this information in a custom shader, I took the image and added a 1 pixel border to every part of the texture. This 1 pixel border might seem tiny, but it was enough to completely erase all of the rendering artifacts. There was absolutely no way in the world that I, a broke college student, could afford to pay for real brand sponsorships, so I made my own. Of course, with Left Turn Legend being a parody of American motorsport, I decided to make the brands into a parody of the United States' corporate culture as a whole. Car accidents can happen to anyone. That's why we made sure to put loopholes in our policies that let us cheat you out of the money that you deserve. Exorbitant insurance. Insurance you can't rely on. I had a ton of fun making all sorts of parody brands and liveries for the cars. To actually create the logos, I used Inkscape to edit them as vector graphics. That way, they would be able to support arbitrarily large or small resolutions. Check out my previous devlog if you want a refresher on what vector graphics are. Since Left Turn Legend is a parody of American motorsports, I wanted to include not only the race cars of today, but also iconic cars from the past. I've added 5 more cars to the game since my last video. 2 of them are from the early 2000s, and another 2 are from the 90s. I've also given each car an in-game name and logo, which you can use as an optional decal. When you pick a car from a past decade, all the AI cars will switch to cars from that time period as well, so you can relive the 90s with the Aero Wars and some of the least stock-looking stock cars ever. For now, there are currently 8 playable cars in the game, but I have big plans for the car list in the future. You might have noticed in my previous videos that I didn't really show any of the menus in the game. That's because the menus didn't really exist yet, and they were just ugly placeholders. Now, I finally created a proper UI for the game. To start with the UI, I decided to pick a color palette. I went with the grayscale one since it went well with the logo and matches the colors of a checkered flag. Next, I created button sprites with rounded corners to give them a bit more flavor. Then, I added icons next to the buttons. These use a flat, simple art style to match the rest of the game. This was a pretty good start, but there was still something lacking. The UI needed something that would increase its flavor further, and that would be transitions. So, I created a script to handle exit and entrance transitions. On buttons that switch menus, the buttons would first trigger an exit transition on the current menu. Then, the next menu would move in with an entrance transition. After going through all of the menus and adding transitions, things finally had more flavor. I also added UI screens for selecting cars and editing decals. The UI looks pretty straightforward, but was a bit of a pain to get right because of the way that Unity's built-in layout components work. I ended up writing yet another custom script that works in combination with the layout components. I think it turned out pretty well with the nice image previews, and I even had time to add in a moving background for a bit more flavor. The current decal system was good for the player car, but doing all sorts of complex mesh intersection math every time I wanted to randomize a paint job for a racer would be too laggy. At the same time though, I definitely wanted to give them liveries with numbers and sponsors. So I had to create a separate, unique decal system just for the racers that would be efficient enough. The main bottleneck in the player decal system was performing the planar slices to determine the decal area. This is necessary for the player car since the decals need to be free to be placed anywhere on the car. But for racers, I realized that I could get away with only having decals in certain fixed locations. For example, the racer car will always have the number on the roof and the sides, and never on the front bumper, so I could pre-compute the decal meshes. So, I wrote a custom script that would allow me to mark the locations that numbers, primary and secondary sponsors, and other decals should spawn on each different car. Then, I baked the decal meshes, which just means that I pre-computed them and saved them. From here, it was as simple as just loading up the baked meshes and applying the decals every time a randomized paint job needed to be generated. Since the laggy process of calculating the mesh intersections no longer needed to be done in actual gameplay, there were no more frame rate issues. This concludes my 5th devlog for Left Turn Legend. I'd like to thank TLM10's Gaming for supporting me and my games as a King Patron. If you'd like to support my games as well, please consider checking out my Patreon link in the video description. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any feedback, thoughts, or questions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.
Are you cutting people off even more than usual? Are you wondering why other people's cars have flashing orange lights while yours doesn't? Try Mr. Beamer's premium blinker fluid today for the low price of $19.99.
Keep away from children. Contact with eyes, make housing control working with you. Mr. Beamer is not responsible for accidents caused by improper turns, please.